hang on, and we are recording.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Whitney Thompson. I am the Senior Director for Career and Technical Education for the Community College Board. And today we are going to be featuring a webinar on Innovative Instructional Strategies brought to us by Dr. Kathy Olson-Tracy. And I'll do a quick little intro of her in a minute, but I know that she wants to introduce herself and make this a really engaging discussion and learning opportunity. I first want to just thank everyone for being here today. I know you are all very busy, right? And it's very beautiful outside today, at least here in Springfield. But I just wanted to sort of introduce the concept for this summer faculty professional development series. We received a number of requests from faculties and talking to our chief academic officers for the need to really address some of the needs for faculty as we are moving through the COVID-19 pandemic and the disruption to learning and our need to be nimble and switch between different modals. So we will be focusing on the switch between in-person and online, remote, hybrid learning strategy. So as a part of that, we wanted to just introduce you to an online remote learning 101. And of course, this isn't going to go really deep into the concept. So this just gives you a general frame, especially since many of you are faculty who may have never taught online before. And so she's going to be talking about some really quick and easy innovative instructional strategies. And then I just want to remind you to stay tuned for the discipline-specific facilitated discussions that will happen next week. We have a whole 6 weeks of professional development for you, and so I hope that you can attend and stay engaged. So I also want you to know that this will be recorded. Closed captioning will be provided. You can see that at the bottom of the Zoom screen. That's provided by Cheyenne Matthias. And then please remember that if you are not talking, although I know that Kathy will probably have you guys talk at some point, to please mute your phones or we will be muting you. So I'd like to take this time to turn it over to Dr. Kathy Olson-Tracy.
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad you found some time to be with me today. And as Whitney had indicated, we're going to start talking about some innovative instructional strategies. And one of the things that I want to get through over the next hour is that you're going to see a lot of ideas throughout the next several weeks. And the key thing is to focus on a few at a time, the ones that work for you, implement them well, and then keep building your strategies and your resources. Before we begin, I just wanted to kind of have my video on to say hi so you could all put a face to the name. And I'm going to stop sharing my video now. And I'm going to ask you to go to your chat box and very quickly just type in one or two words about how you feel right now as far as teaching in this current crisis. What are you struggling with? How are you feeling? Just give me a little idea of what's happening in your space. And if you don't know how to get to the chat feature, let me know. You can get up to the panel and you can go to the drop down and you will see the buttons and you will be able to see the chat. So if anybody would like to go ahead and start sharing some of their ideas, that would be great.
Kathy, I think that our chat is set to not go out live, and I think that came from our board meeting. We had to make a change.
Okay, well then we're going to adapt.
Can chat with. Hold on. No, I got it.
Okay.
Okay. With apologies, everybody just needs to redo that again, and it should now work properly.
Thank you. So one of the things that we learn about online webinars and everything is that we have to pivot quickly and adapt. So Abby's talking about maintaining rigor while being accessible. So those are very, very interesting, combinations of ideas. We're talking about being apprehensive and excited. Yeah, it's a scary time, but there's a lot of opportunities. And I'm seeing overwhelmed. Overwhelmed is very easy. And I want to pause on that idea and think about how overwhelmed our students are feeling at the same time, because they have a lot to learn, not only in the content we're teaching, but in the way we're presenting it. I'm glad that everyone wants to learn great ideas, and I hope that this works for you. And I see people are frustration with and for students because, again, students are struggling right now in this whole flip as quickly as we are. So there's a lot of high emotions going on, a lot of struggles happening. So we're right in the middle of all of that. I'm working with some nursing programs, and those online clinicals are very difficult for nursing students. Yeah. Okay. The theme that I'm seeing right now are just a general sense of being overwhelmed. I'm seeing a general sense of where we
because
are.
of the house being.
Okay, we have somebody who's not on
So
mute.
can I get one of these tags?
Okay, thank you. That's one. So we're going to start looking at what we can do. Now, I'd like to think about how you're talking about you're eager to learn, you're overwhelmed, there's a lot happening. But from today, what do you want to learn from what I'm going to be able to share? What brought you to this particular session? And go ahead and just keep typing that in your chat feature. You got through your college email, okay. Expand capabilities of course content, okay, okay. So that's some of the things that we're going to definitely touch on today. Straightforward platform. You know, one of the things that is going to keep our students focused and able to succeed is when the instruction is clear and clearly organized. So that's a really good strategy. So we're going to talk about student engagement. Actually, that's the next slide, and that's kind of a great transition to what we're going to be talking about. So my goals for today are to help us create an online space that promotes engagement, and then create meaningful instructional activities that support student achievement. And I want to stop with the word engagement for just a minute. And we talk about engagement a lot, but I want to caution you to have a clear definition of engagement, because that's a really hard concept to measure in your teaching. And we tend to want to engage students. And what does that really mean? And how do we engage them in a way that is connected to instruction and stepping away from entertainment and truly about engagement? So what does that look like? This is probably the most important slide that I'm going to share with you throughout the day. Everything I'm going to talk about is going to come back to this section. And mind maps, Dave is using those. I would love to learn how you're doing mind maps. There's some great tools that we can talk about. But let's talk about getting that environment started. And the first thing about creating engagement is getting the student objectives in a way that students can understand and connect with. We write our objectives in a way that our academic departments need them to be written in a way that we have to put out there. But oftentimes those objectives don't have a connection to the student. And what's really important is students need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. So when we start talking about engaging the student and building that platform and creating that organized space, I'm talking about beginning with your objectives and having students figure out how to connect to those, because you're writing them in a language for students. I don't suggest replacing the academic objectives that we have in our syllabus. I'm suggesting that you put a space below it where you're interpreting those in a student language, because students need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. How many of your students actually spend time talking to you about the objectives in the classroom? Have any of you ever had a time where students come up to you and talked about the objectives that you set forward? I've been teaching about 25 years and I've never had that experience. When I started switching it to the language that matters to students, students come to me and talk to me about it. This is step one. The next step for engaging the learning and engaging the learner is to have them set their own learning goal with as a connection to the material. So in the example I've got, a student can say, oh, this class is going to prepare me to do research. I can write better papers in all my other classes. So my goal is to learn how to write an effective paper using research so that I can get better grades in all of my classes. Right there, you have set a personal goal for the student. They're connecting that goal to what you're doing, and that is building that sense of engagement. Oftentimes, our students may be coming into our classroom lacking some of the required pre-existing knowledge about course topics. And I'm going to specifically go into a strategy using something called HyperDocs that will help you with providing students with background knowledge so they can be successful. You may want to measure their prior knowledge and understand what background knowledge they're lacking by small course quizzes or things like that, surveys. Assignments need to be connected to the objective. What happens often is we go through the syllabus in the first day of course, and then we step away from it, and then we start teaching the content, and we get, you know, so deep into the woods with the content because we want our students to really understand what we're doing that we often don't remember to go back to that objective and say, this assignment will help you learn how to read research. This assignment will help you understand data analysis. This reading will help you interpret information that you're reading and interpret it and write an interpretation of it. And that's connected to that goal. And if we can do that in our basic structure of the class, we are really talking about engaging that student. I'm also going to suggest that we go back and in each week we review our online lectures and recap sessions. So the rest of what I'm going to share with you today are going to be specific strategies that help you reach all of these goals to create that engaging environment. Before I move to the next slide, I'd like you to kind of share your thoughts with it. If you want to unmute yourself and share, or type in the chat feature and share. What are you thinking about what I'm talking about as far as framing the course with this environment to create that engagement?
Good idea.
I don't see anybody unmuting
Well,
themselves yet.
I think it's a great idea. And I think also sometimes I encourage students by saying, you're going to get a better job in the future if you know how to write, and things like that kind of go into the next step of their life.
Absolutely. We connect it to where they want to go. And that's the engagement we need to build into it, because they can see relevance in what we're doing. And I think that's a critical example.
Thank you.
And Davis is sharing that we show progression from one lesson to the next. One of the things that we do in classes, I'm guilty of this myself, is I get so involved in what I'm prepared to teach that day that I don't stop and reflect on what we just did the day before or the week before, and wrap those connections and make it a seamless experience. I forget to do that sometimes. So yes, showing the progression and building on it.
I think for me, one of the things I appreciate is these are things that I already do, but I realized as you were talking about it that I could do more of that, even with the online materials.
Right, right. These are things that we can do. And scaffolding, Dave is really sharing some great ideas in the chat. and seeing the relevance of what they do in class for a lifetime of learning. These are important things. Now, ironically, and in the resources that you're going to get a link to where this research came from, and we're talking about creating equity in the classroom. So when students understand where they're going, and think about your underprepared students or your students are first generation students who may not understand the connection between all these classes. You're creating that environment for them, and you're scaffolding and you're helping them build off of their experience. So in the resources, links to more in-depth ideas on this are available to you. So let's talk introductions in your online classroom. This is what I suggest. Often in our online classrooms, we put down a discussion thing as an icebreaker, and we ask students to tell about themselves. In my class that I'm currently teaching, I've asked people to do a Foursquare and tell me 4 things about themselves that they like. Okay, whenever you talk to me about what I like right now, I'm going to show pictures of my brand new and only granddaughter, first and primary. You know, that's my son and that's my granddaughter. You don't even see my son because, well, he's not the important one in that picture. We're talking about what I'm currently reading. You know, you can get a little bit of insight into who I am. I want to ask you, does this give you more insight to me as opposed to me typing into a discussion, hi, my name is Kathy, I've been teaching for a quarter of a century. Which one is more personal?
This, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Abby, I am going to talk about equity in the classroom at the end. I want you to see, I recognize that question, and I will wrap that up with that comment. To go back, you can do things like this where students like to share their pictures. They like to share their ideas, and not everybody likes to share a personal picture. You're going to see there's not a single picture of me in here. I don't really have great pictures that I post of myself. I post lots of my granddaughter. When we start our introductions, I want you to think about the goal of the introduction. That is twofold. 1, we get to know our students, and 2, our students get to know each other. And when we're talking about engaging and building that community of learners, what we have to do is get them talking to each other. And I've given you 4 things to talk about with me. You can talk about books and what I've currently read. You can talk about family. You can see that I'm a dog lover. You know, we have a lot of conversations that we can have that are going to broaden just beyond our course. So I want you to think about what the goal of your introductory icebreaking activity is. Is it to make sure a student has logged on and knows how to post? Is it because you want students to connect with each other? Is it because you're trying to get to know the student? And then design that appropriately. In the resources that we have, there are a dozen different ideas about how to do icebreaking activities. One activity is you can partner students by making a master list, and they have to introduce the person on the list. So that means I'm going to email and set up a meeting with somebody and say, tell me about yourself, and they introduce the other person. We do that in the classroom all the time. There are games like 2 truths and a lie, and people can try and ferret out the actual truth and kind of talk to each other. So if your introduction is a way to build community, there are things that you can do. And in your resource link from here, it will share with you a bunch of ideas about introductory activities. I don't make students respond to each other in the introductions. Sometimes they do. But my goal for introductions in the courses that I teach are just for me to get to understand people. Because when I provide feedback into their introduction, I'm going to connect it to something that they're sharing with me. And I'm going to say, oh, you like to read? Here are a few books that I like. Or, oh, that granddaughter's beautiful, and tell me about where they live, or something like that. And discussion boards.
Can I ask a question, Kathy? Or make a comment on this? I just took an online course from Quality Matters, and I felt like There was a slight picture of the instructor, but I never heard her voice. And I really felt that I wanted to see her and hear her. Otherwise, you're just giving, everything I was turning in was going into the ether. And I too don't want to have my picture out there, but it's kind of an act of humility to do it. You know what I'm saying? And
It
maybe,
is.
yeah, I mean, and we don't want to because we're more intellectual and abstract people. But I think students connect with a real person. That's just my experience, but I just wanted to throw that in.
And I think you're very, very on point with that. Students need to connect with us as people because they need to know who we are.
Yeah.
And then to wrap up, one question about discussion boards to introduce students. Yes, we can introduce each other. And that just takes a little bit of upfront work with you pairing students from your course list and then putting that assignment out there saying, Kathy, you're going to introduce Kathleen, and Abby, you're going to introduce Holly, and Holly, you're going to introduce, and it just takes a little bit of that pairing, but then they can talk to each other. And then they have a study buddy, so to speak, in their class. So there are ways to do that, okay? Now, let's talk about alternatives to lectures. When I talked about scaffolding, building students' background knowledge, we're talking about engagement, having student control over what they're learning, personal goals. I want to share an idea with you about something called hyperdocs. Back in the day, I've been doing this a long time, they used to be called web quests. All right, and I'm going to show you two examples. I want you to bear with me as I go from my screen to these examples I have pulled up to show you what they are. And they're wonderful ways to do this. I will show you a very polished one for a book, and then I'll show you one that I used in teaching at a community college as I was doing a boot camp for them. So this is the first one. It's simply a PowerPoint presentation. And this is one on Fahrenheit 451. So this is a book many English students may read in a high school class, maybe in a college class. So bear with me as I link to this. And I'm going to share this screen. And I gotta find my screen to share, so just give me one hot second for this. Okay, you should be seeing Fahrenheit 451. These used to be called web quests, and it's very simply a PowerPoint presentation where you are combining all of the things that you want to have the student understand. This teacher is framing the questions that they want the students to gather as they work through it. Now, why read Fahrenheit 9/11? And this embedded YouTube video is going to show students what they're doing. So you're engaging the student, you're connecting the student to a variety of resources. They're reading, they're watching videos, they're going to be hearing things. As they work through this hyperdoc, there are tools that they collect and things that they're going to look through, like table of contents and what they're going to be doing. There are audio elements. There are all kinds of tools in here for the student to get to. And they can read the text of the page. There's an audio piece where they're reading part of the text. There's a reading journal that students have to put together. I clicked the wrong button. There's a reading journal that the student goes to. And it'll allow you to make a copy. This is somebody who shared this. But as you create this, what you can do is get students into a lot of resources very quickly. So here's a reading journal with key questions that students need to be asked. This also allows the students to submit some responses to these questions. The idea here on the reading journal is it focuses on questions, summarizing a section. When the student completes their action, you have record of it. There is a tutorial link in the resources about how to create hyperdocs. These are really very simple resources that you can work on. So I want to pause and I want to see what you guys think about a hyperdoc. And then I'm going to show you one that I used. And then I'm going to talk about how that can scaffold and build background knowledge. What do you guys think?
I think that looks really cool. I've never seen anything like that before. I think it could be a really easy way to teach students how to work through the material. I feel like I try to do that, like, okay, you should have read your textbook. You should have, you know, done your homework at this point in time. You should have asked questions. And so it seems like an easy way for them to learn how to do that on their own.
It does. It is a way, and to somebody's comment about it looks difficult to build, it was strictly a PowerPoint. I'm not loving the orange on it, but it's a PowerPoint. But I want to show you mine because mine was not nearly as colorful or as vivid as that one was, okay? So can you see the screen that just has a small, it says, welcome to English Boot Camp, and it has a little letter that says hello? Can you guys all see that correct screen? Okay. Mine was much simpler and a lot easier to build because I started working with this kind of idea of linking everything. What I did on this one is it was an English boot camp. Students were taking a week-long boot camp at a community college to bump up from the developmental education courses to the credit-bearing courses. And these were students who were in that cusp of trying to get a little bit better. When I talk about building background knowledge, when I talk about scaffolding, and when I talk about giving students that enrichment, this is a simple way to do it. And it's not as in-depth or as vivid as the one we just saw. This was the link that they had in their course. And they would click on the links, and what would happen is it would open a new document. If you can see the preview, and I'm going to try and make this a little bit bigger, and students could work on adjectives, they could work on adverbs, antecedents, articles, basically the fanboys, and other types of tips. Students could go in, they were required to review each one of these activities, but they had links beyond those. So students who wanted to learn more about adjectives and adverbs could go in deeper. Students who really didn't need to have that skill set could go into antecedents, and they could work through that. And what this allowed was students to have control over their learning. What this allowed was students to spend as much time on a background knowledge that they needed to build and focus on what I wanted them to focus on. At the end of the boot camp, every one of my students placed up one level in their skill set. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they worked really hard. They worked very hard to move up. But this allows that scaffolding and that building of that background knowledge. As teachers, we have students coming into our classroom that lack that background knowledge, but we can't necessarily always go into that instruction to help them build that. But the only way for them to be successful is to have access to that information. So where I really think that we can make a difference right now is by showing them resources and links to build that information. And I want to pause and see what you guys think about something as simple as a hyperdoc as a way to move your information forward into a way students can access content. It could be a really good syllabus to move people around to the pieces that are important to them. Okay, I'm going to come back here to my, thank you. They're very simple to do. And I think that they help a lot when I talk about building that background knowledge. Okay.
Kathy, one thing,
next page. Yes.
Kathy, one thing that I really liked about the HyperDocs is the simplicity and the organized feel of it. I think sometimes, especially when students have multiple online classes, and for those who aren't used to taking online courses, I think that it can be overwhelming with the number of links and documents
Right.
and trying to stay organized. So I think if you do the HyperDocs well, and to Dave's point in the chat, if it's not laid out well, I think just keeping it simple, the simpler the better. So I really liked your version versus the Fahrenheit 451, and obviously. But I think it's just really a helpful tool to help the students stay organized, but also have everything in one space instead of, you know, go to the resources page to get this, and then go to the assignments page to get this. And obviously you would still have those things, right? But I think it's important to sort of keep it simple and keep it organized.
Absolutely. And I agree with you 100%. They have to be laid out well. I picked the Fahrenheit 451 not because I love the design. I have to tell you that orange hurts my eyes. But I liked the idea of the reading journal, the idea of organizing quotes within that. I liked the idea of connecting some videos to it. So that's one of the reasons I selected that, but you could clean that up and make it a much simpler looking and a much clearer type of document. So to your point, yes, you want to make sure it's clean and clear for the student. And I agree that we don't want to overfill these documents with images and colors, because that really defeats the purpose if a student can't navigate through all of this high content. But the purpose I hope you take away from this is to lay it out clearly and cleanly, and then to be able to bring things in so students know how to find information. Yes, in the links to the resources, there are links to HyperDocs, and there are tutorials for that. And then also at the end of this, if there's any particular idea that you guys have liked and want some additional help with, you'll have my email contact and I can work with it, okay? Now I wanna make sure without screen sharing, there's a boot camp, and we've kind of talked about what we did. Are you seeing the PowerPoint that says the discussion board with a parachute? Is that what you guys are seeing?
Yes.
Yes.
Beautiful. I got back where I needed to be. Okay. So I love this concept. I didn't come up with it myself. I was trying to find where I came up with it, but this idea of students parachuting into discussions. You know, they haven't read the work or the assignments. They read what somebody else has posted, and then they kind of rehash that to look like they've read what they've done. They're just jumping in the middle of this discussion. And I really liked that concept of, you know, how do we frame our discussions? So before I do that, very quickly, I want to ask you, why do you use discussions in your classroom, in your online classroom, and in your face-to-face classroom? What is your purpose for adding the discussions? To keep students engaged with content and each other, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a couple of things to create relationships. Yes, they can talk to each other. We know that that communication is essential. So I'm going to kind of loop back to, it's a way to reflect and see what they're talking about and teach thought processes. These are great ideas. And let's go back to that first slide that I was talking about in that equity classroom of making sure that we scaffold knowledge, that we build on relationships, that we provide clear instructions. One of the things that students need to understand is, why are they having this discussion? Often we put a discussion out there and say, post an initial response and respond to at least 2 of your peers. And then we grade them on that. And we have not said to them, here's why we're doing this. We're putting that discussion out there to see if you understand the content. We're putting this out there so that if you can part of this learning community, we're putting this out there to create relationships with your peers. So framing this with the objective and connecting the discussion back to the learning objective that you made. We're talking about this topic so that you can build skill base and build knowledge in research or whatever it is that we're doing. And rather than just putting this discussion board in there, because what happens in my class, students log in, they wait, they post their initial response, they go in, they post a response to 2 peers, and they never go back. They've done their checklist. My daughter's roommate in college never posted an initial response. She graduated with honors out of a university, took many online courses, never posted an initial response, would log in and post responses. So she would get partial credit. But it didn't meet the needs of what we're trying to do. She's not joining that community of learners. She's not looking through thought processes. You're not able to see if she understands that content. So frame the discussion with your objective. What do you want the student to get out of that? And why does the student need to know what they're doing? And I'm going to talk about a few different ways to have discussions. I do not believe that you need to do everything in one online class. I'm showing you options. If you like the concept of hyperdocs but don't like the concept of PADLET, that's fine. You don't want to have so many different things happening in a classroom that your learner gets confused. Yes. And students, so how many of you are familiar with PADLET? Has anybody ever seen anything like this? Okay. These are very common in the K-12 environment, but ironically, PADLET and Flipgrid, which are 2 I'm going to talk about, were designed for higher education, and they were intended to be used in higher education. They're just, they've been kind of co-opted a little bit by the K-12 world, so a lot of our people know about this. So think of a discussion. PADLET is a way to create a discussion. And you as a teacher create a discussion. What's the best Grammy song of the year 2010? Boy, we could debate music really well. There's a lot of different examples. I'm going to go into one and I'm going to show you what it looks like as a way to get students moving forward. Give me a second while I change my screen. Okay, and I'm now on a new share for the new screen. Can you see this? It looks the same, but I'm going to come into the one that's War Theory and Practice, because this came out of Washington University, Washington State. And students created a study guide together. And what they did was created panels on things that they need to know about this assessment they were going to take. And they came together and they each put panels together. This is a version of a discussion where everybody's sharing different information and they pulled it together. Think Pinterest for the classroom, if that helps you frame it. And what you can put in here are also video clips, audio clips, links to websites, personal notes, and ideas along those lines. This is a great one. Okay, I wasn't sure if I had a comment or just, okay. So you have a lot here. Now this is not going to work for everybody. This was something my daughter used to organize her notes. My son would never have been able to do this. So I want you to think carefully about what your goal is for using these and how you want to build that community. This is also a great way in discussions. We also use discussion threads for class presentations. And I didn't see that in your comments, but a lot of times we use those discussion threads for students to post a PowerPoint and lead a discussion. Well, here's another way to do group work put the information out there, and then students can access it and talk about it. There is a tutorial on the resources on how to create some of these. I'm going to go back to another gallery and look at another one. Anybody have one they prefer? I've got fact or fiction, chores to do, field trip photo contest, a KWL chart. I'll go to this one. I'm a big believer in graphic organizers, and I use those a lot. So here's that student setting their own goals. They can create a Padlet and share that with you of what they want to learn in your course. What they do know, you can assess their background knowledge. You can identify what they want to know, and you're scaffolding it and getting an information about what they've learned as they go. So you can put something this simple for a student's way to organize their information. Some students really like these types of charts, some may not. And I want to pause here, and I want to come back to our conversation, and I'd like to hear what you think about Padlet. Does this have any place in the classroom that you're doing? It can be self-help for students. They can create their own notes, and it might. I would not suggest you do HyperDocs and Padlet in the same classroom until you're comfortable with one or the other. But it's an option to use because students are very in tune to things. Some students, let me rephrase that, are very in tune to things like Pinterest and Snapchat and all of these types of tools, and they may adapt to them quickly. Abby, I think you are right on target with everything that you're saying, and you're talking about clear instructions, and everything needs to be organized well. I cannot agree with you anymore that that is a perfect statement. Yes, what we put out there, and one of the things that I see happening with online learning is that we try to pull in so many of these new ideas that students are first going to VoiceThread, and then they're going to come over to a Google Doc, and then they're going to come over and do a Padlet, and then they're going to do something else. And that really confuses learners. So pick the tools that you are most connected to out of the ones that I'm sharing, and then embrace those into your classroom. Tom, I'm going to show you how to do a video audio in Flipgrid. Okay, the tutorials are there so you can learn how to do the tech pieces to it. I don't know which one of these actually has the video in them. And I'll show that a little bit in Flipgrid as we talk about that one. The idea here is to use these as discussion tools or assignments for that group work. But again, let's go back to that scaffolding, that back to that learner-centeredness, and that back to those ideas about that equity. When I'm talking about equity in the classroom, what I am talking about is creating an environment where students have access to the information and tools to be successful. I'm talking about the way we organize our material so that students can feel included in the environment and where they can show their personality and be accepted. Those are all parts of that equity discussion. And we can do this in some of the ways through these tools. So rather than a discussion board, you could use a Padlet tool. You could use Flipgrid, and I'm going to talk about that one in just a minute. I'll go to that one now. I don't have links to Flipgrid because the interesting thing about Flipgrid is that you create those and you can keep them private. So they don't come out there for the greater people to go in there and click into and look at. Flipgrid was created at the University of Minnesota. Again, focus on higher education. And the idea here is that students can create a video. So you can post a discussion question and the student posts their response in like a minute or two. And then you have an entire array of courses, discussions happening through conversation. And think about this, it gives that a little bit more of that personality. I'm gonna come back to what Kathleen said at the beginning of the class, and that connection to that student, the connection to the teacher, and maybe to put our pictures out there so they can feel like they're talking to a real person. With our students, that's also the case, they're talking to each other. And Flipgrid is simply the same type of tool. To go back to what you can do on that course reflection, you can ask students to reflect on what they've learned. I always put mid-course reflections in my classrooms. So one of their assignments is always to write a reflection for me about what they've learned, what is working, and what is not working. And then they get full credit for turning it in, but it allows them to tell me what's happening and what's not happening midway through the course when I have enough time to correct it. Flipgrid just is a video tool that will allow you those resources. And I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna ask you guys, which idea did you like the most? The HyperDoc, the Padlet, or the Flipgrid? Okay, okay.
I forgot.
Okay, so if Padlet's easy to get started with because students are familiar with Pinterest. So yeah, and HyperDocs. So when you start Googling HyperDocs, you're going to find out a lot of examples. Again, this was really taken over by the K-12 environment. So some of those examples may look like they're used for kids, but you can adapt those concepts and you can build those into what you need. And a lot of people who are in those HyperDocs will share, if you ask for permission, they will share that with you, and then you can adapt it and fit it to what you need it to be, so you're not starting from scratch. Flipgrid is very, very easy to use in our world. I would caution the one thing on Flipgrid that I struggle with, and I do use this, is some students don't have a video camera. Their laptop or their equipment, it does not have a video camera. So you're going to want to create a way for them to only put an audio piece up there, because they can probably speak into their phone, or they're going to, there's got to be an alternative to a student who does not have a camera.
Yeah. Okay.
Oops. Let me go back to where I needed to be. So this is kind of where I have shown with you the various tools and strategies. And I want to come back to the creating the environment and kind of wrap up the conversation, pulling these pieces together. When we talk about engaging students, we talk about that clean, well-developed online space. We're talking about ways to get students connected to us. The tools where they can set their own learning goal, you can use Flipgrid, you can use an assignment where they type something into you, you can use Padlet, you can have students send you an email. However you choose to do that, allowing them to set their own goals is critical. When you measure students' prior knowledge about course topics, one of the ideas that I like the best about HyperDocs is I can put in a lot of different things. I can help students build background knowledge with links to different resources.
Kathy, I think we lost you for a quick second.
I think we did too.
Hello, Kathy. So while she may be having some internet connection issues, and so while she may be trying to get back on here, I think too, something that I think is really important is, especially for some of you who may have never taught an online class, but who are teaching students who have been in online classes, is that they have a specific expectation for their online courses because they've been in a couple of online courses, and it seems, at least for the math, they all sort of follow the same format. So if you're going to be really moving the needle and setting the bar and really pushing them to engage in an online learning community, they may push back against that a little bit. So I think it's really important to set those expectations up front to let them know, hey, this is not going to be your typical, especially if you're thinking about pushing that envelope and making sure that they're engaged. You know, this is not going to be your typical online course, even though it may be asynchronous, right? There's going to be a level of engagement that's needed, and here are the expectations, and here is sort of my expectations for the course. I think that's really important. I've received that pushback in the past, right? Like, oh, well, I'm used to doing A, B, and C. Well, I think it's important to set those expectations up front. All right, so Kathy just texted and said that she got kicked out of the Zoom, probably because of internet connection issues. So I am going to just quickly close this up. Are there any other questions you have or discussion points that you would like to bring forth?
I would just like to answer the question that Janet asked about online students. I took the Quality Matters course, Introduction to Online Teaching, and I put together a profile of an online learner, a good online learner, and it doesn't include everybody, doesn't include every student. And I think that's, you know, important for us to know that, because that says to me that we need to make it as social as possible to include more, but not to get discouraged, because it's not going to be everybody's favorite way to learn. What do you think? You're welcome, Janet. I know Janet, so.
How about others? Are some of you sound like you've taught in an online environment before? Any of you will be new to online learning? I guess some of you would have switched to that mid-spring, but any of you will be new to online learning or online teaching this fall? And what are your questions?
I am new to online teaching, although I'm doing online tutoring right now. My concern is that that we do have a tremendously broad range of students, as I wrote in one of the chats. I have students who have almost never.
Hi guys, this is Kathy, I'm back.
So, you know, we are coming to online teaching for our students who have anywhere from almost zero experience to a computer. Pretty good standard Chicago public school, high school experience with a computer. And so designing a curriculum for an online course really does have to, in some ways, be as simple as possible so that they can access it. As a former software technical writer, I have to say, including bells and whistles like the Fahrenheit 451 stuff did, I think distracts and detracts more than it maybe enhances. So I think keeping things as simple as possible is important.
Okay.
I think that's it. I don't know, Kathy, are you still, it looks like you're frozen, so.
Oh, no, I'm here.
Oh,
Kathy
sorry,
Tracy.
Kathy, you're
Kathy,
fine.
she is. There she goes.
So I was able to listen to your conversation about students that are underprepared with technology skills and underprepared academically. One thing that I recommend is having a block or a section in your online course that links to students to all of the support services and tutorials that can help them build the knowledge they need. and have that as a resource section. But more than just linking to that and saying, here's our writing center, here's our technology support help, list what kinds of support students can get from there and help them understand how to get the help. If a student doesn't know how to ask the questions, then they don't always get the support that they need. So when you're building these online courses, and even in your face-to-face classes, giving the students resources so they know how to connect and where to connect will help. And tutorials on using some of the technology resources that you require in your class are going to be helpful. I would not encourage you to use Padlet in your classroom without a tutorial link for students to know how to use it. So those kinds of things are important.
I think the student-to-student interaction is important, as well as the student-to-faculty interaction. I think that's often what's missed in online learning. Janet, I really appreciate your point about students who are really going to struggle with the technology that's presented by our LMSs sometimes. So I think a couple of colleges have really worked to create I'm trying to think of the word, but basically that each page would look the same, right? You would have the same organization of your online course. It wouldn't necessarily be that you would have the same types of instructional strategies, but I think that is a really good tool for colleges to use so that students, when they're in, you know, course 1 and then they switch to course 2, right? It looks the same in terms of organization. I think, Kathy, I'll let you close out, and then I want to do a quick closing to introduce some of the other facilitated discussions and webinars that we'll be featuring this month.
Okay. So I will tell you guys all that I have been working from home since March 13th, and I have done webinars almost on a daily basis, and this is the first time in the middle of a webinar that my power went out. I have absolutely no idea what just happened. So I apologize for the disruption, and I thank you, Whitney, for kind of wrapping up the discussion. I am available via email for anybody who wants to set up a phone call and talk through any of the tools that I shared. If you create something and want feedback, feel free to share it with me, and I will provide you some ideas, tips, and strategies. And as you're working through your online courses, use me as a resource. I'll be glad to assist. I hope you found something meaningful out of today. Thank you.
And the presentation will be linked on our website where you found the Zoom link, and I'll be making sure that that's up there. Kathy, if you also want to just type your email address in the chat box, maybe that will be helpful for folks too.
I'm going to ask you, Whitney, to do that. I'm on my phone and I can't get
okay.
I literally am sitting in a house with no power, and I don't know exactly what just happened.
Wow.
All right, so while I'm doing that, I just want to make a note that we will be having a session on Thursday on assessment in an online environment, whether it's hybrid or whether you are fully online or remote. And the presenters will be talking about the different LMS learning management systems that we have. So they'll be talking about Canvas, they'll be talking about Desire to Learn, they'll be talking about some of those other ones. So, and that will be a really good presentation. So following this week's webinar series, which is just today's and Thursdays, next week we're going to be having facilitated discussions. Those won't be presentations. So we will be having, and you can see that on the list that we have posted. So there's going to be a facilitated discussion for adult basic education instructors, a facilitated discussion for early childhood educators, a discussion for those in the criminal justice field. So that's just going to be, hey, you listened to these webinars this week. Now, what do these concepts or what do these topics look like in your specific courses, right? In your specific discipline. And so I really encourage you to join those. If you do not see your specific discipline up there, that is because we didn't have anyone come forward to volunteer to lead the discussion. and to keep people sort of on track. So if you don't see that and you want a facilitated discussion for your discipline, please email me. I will put both Kathy and I's emails in the chat. And I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to do some learning with us. And I hope that this was helpful.
Thank you.
Oh, here it is, at illinois.gov.
Yeah.
Olson.
Thank you.